Hey guys, I don't know if you realize this or not, but it is college basketball time. That is right. College basketball will be what we are consuming an awful lot over the next few weeks into months, and I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on to talk about this year's college basketball slate, the teams, the new coaches, everything that you need to know about college basketball. This is the man that you should turn to. He is Wager Talk's Ralph Michaels at Cal Sports LV on Twitter. And Ralph, you excited, man? I know you got a little itch when it comes to college basketball, man. This is kind of right up your alley, isn't it?
Oh, I'll tell you what, college basketball is my favorite sport. You know, for those that don't know my history, I was the general manager of Phil Steele Publications and North Coast Sports, you know, for about 15 years. And during that time, Dish TV is better. Went towards North Coast Sports, but I still had Cal Sports doing college basketball. Not many people knew that. So I've been doing college basketball and being very successful at it for quite a time. It's by far my favorite sport, and I think it's simply this. When you have now 353 teams, there was 351 last year, and you have 32 conferences, when you're in November, Vegas is worried about putting lines on the NFL number 1, college football number 2, the NBA, soccer, the NHL, and then all of a sudden you open up the basketball season with 143 games on November the 6th. It's a shock to the system. You can't get all those games right. So your job as a handicapper is simple. It's finding value where Vegas is wrong with the line. And when you have that many opportunities to do it, if you're putting the work in, you can find those nuggets, and they've been gold.
Yes, they certainly have been. And, you know, you say putting the work in, Ralph, and nobody puts more work into college basketball season than Ralph Michaels. And we always talk about how knowledge is power on this show, which is why we love wagertalk.com. And talk to us about what kind of information and what kind of knowledge can we get by going to wagertalk.com about college basketball.
You know, if you go to wagertalk.com, look at the handicappers page and go to the Cal Sports page, you're going to see my college basketball guide, 70-some pages of information. And basically it's this. I get asked a lot, how the heck with 353 teams do you make power ratings? Do you get started with the season and you can handicap in November? Well, basically I did a guide, which is how I set up my power ratings. First of all, people think you can look at what a team did last year, look at how many returning starters are back, and adjust your power ratings accordingly. Well, certainly not true. One of the most important things you have to realize, you have to know what a team had going into last year before you can determine what their numbers are going to be. If you had 0 returning starters and yet you finished 7th or 8th in the division, your offensive points per game and rebounds were low, and this year you have 5 returning starters, it's a huge difference. Otherwise, if you had 5 starters back last year and this year you only return 1 or 2, again, you're not going to have those same results and you can't make those same adjustments. So basically, I take a look back at last year. I look at how many returning starters they had, their records in both conference and overall, what my final rank was for that team, and what their strength of schedule was. I have the points per game and rebounds per diff, the AP ratings, the preseason rating, their high during the season, and their regular season finale, and if they made the tournament. So all of that information is just last year's info giving you a base to start this year's numbers on.
And when they go to wagertalk.com, Ralph, and they go ahead and they download the sheet that you have, kind of walk them through, if you could. How are they reading that? I mean, for those that may not have ever been involved in something like this, they look at the sheet or the spreadsheet, it might be a little overwhelming. How do you simplify it for them?
It is. Well, the interesting thing is I decided to leave it in last year's order as far as conference record goes. So when they're looking at the sheet and they're looking at all that information from last year, you get a positive base on how good the team was. Then we turn to this year. Right next to the sheet, you're going to see this year's information. Well, it's going to give you the head coach's name and how long he's been a head coach at this school. As I said, there's 353 Division I teams this year. 55 of them have new head coaches. That's an important tool. In college basketball, when you only have 5 new players and a new head coach, the head coach, to me, is more important in basketball than in other sports. And then it's important to know what that coach did. What was his previous experience? For every one of those 55 new head coaches, you're going to have a bio line on what he did the previous few years, what his experience was, and to give you an example with those head coaches, 2 unique situations. Well, the main head coach, the main Black Bears, their head coach has never been a men's head coach or a men's assistant head coach. He was the men's women basketball head coach the last 6 years, and the previous 16 years, he was a woman's assistant. So who knows how that's going to play out? I don't know if that's a positive or a negative, but again, it's something to keep an eye on and know that he's in a unique situation. Another one, again, is Memphis's Penny Hardaway. Everyone knows Penny Hardaway as an NBA player. Well, his only experience as a head coach, he was a high school head coach for 1 year last year, and he was a high school head coach for 2 years. So again, at a glance, you know Penny Hardaway is going to have a question mark when you start the season. But then continuing on, I give you all the returning starters for each team going into the season. I give you their recruiting class. And we know how important recruiting classes are. You have a class this year like Duke. Duke returned 0 starters this year, but they have a historically good recruiting class. They're going to have two players that could be the top 2 players in the draft next year. So by looking at the recruiting classes, that gives you an edge as well. And then I have 3 separate ranks, not including mine, on how teams are projected to do this year in the conference. So all of those steps give you a gauge. Then I also have the last 3 years stats for every team. Every one of the 351 teams that played Division I last year, you're going to get what their tempo rating was, what my offensive and defensive efficiency was. It doesn't mean they were the #1 NCAA team in points per game allowed, because we know that doesn't mean they're the best defense. You have to base those on the schedule. And then you have 12 other ratings: field goal percentages, offense and defense, 3% offense and defense, rebounding, offense and defense. So again, all of that is a gauge just to get you your foot in the door to start to know these teams as the season starts on Tuesday.
It's crazy. Ralph Michaels joining us, wagertalk.com. He is, when I tell you, one of the premier handicappers when it comes to college basketball. And what he's talking about right now, if you're just joining us, is he has an amazing sheet that is available to you at wagertalk.com. And Ralph, I believe if they go to the Cal Sports page at wagertalk.com, they'll be able to download all of this information you're telling us about. Is that correct?
You are. You're going to see that it's actually listed as a product. You will have to register one time. You don't have to pay anything. You don't have to put in a credit card, but you do need to register your name and email once. Once you do that, you can get all of the guides: football, NBA. I'll be doing one for college basketball, plus this preseason college basketball guide. You'll be able to download them free without any hassles after that first time. So don't be afraid to go ahead and input that data. Again, you're not paying anything, no credit card number needed. You just have to register once.
Yes, that's right. See, knowledge is power, and this is how you get that knowledge, by heading over to wagertalk.com. Now, Ralph, you had mentioned an interesting thing there. You talked about you got some new college head coaches coming in this year. You've got some teams with returning players. You've got some teams without any returning players. Is there a correlation to make among all of those things, or do each of them separately mean their own thing?
Well, having 0 returning starters obviously affects 95% of the teams. You know, you have a team like Duke or Kentucky, those teams aren't affected because they can get 3 players that are going to be NBA players, go to the NBA draft next year. But outside of those top 5 or 10 programs that can recruit at that level, obviously you're starting over. There are 11 teams this year that return 0 starters. Florida Gulf Coast, North Carolina Asheville, Mount St. Mary's, Texas Arlington, Arizona, Duke, Jackson State, Mercer, Samford, Savannah State, and Stetson. Now, a lot of those are smaller schools, but to me, I love handicapping those smaller schools. People are going to pay attention. They know what Kentucky and Duke and Michigan State and Kansas bring to the table. Vegas is not going to concern themselves less with Stetson, Samford, Mercer. Those teams don't have everyone in the public playing those games because they're on TV. To me, there's even more value in those situations. And to really be starting over, of those 11 teams I just mentioned with 0 returning starters, 4 of them have brand new head coaches that have never been a head coach before. Florida Gulf Coast, new head coach Michael Fly. Well, he was an assistant here the last 7 years, so he's familiar with the program. North Carolina Asheville, Mike Morrell is the first-year head coach. He's never been a head coach. He was a Texas assistant the last 3 years, a VCU assistant 4 years prior. Mount St. Mary's has Dan Engelstad taken over. He was a head coach, but it was at a D3 team, Southern Vermont, the last 5 years. And Texas Arlington, which has been a tournament team for multiple years in the last 5 years, Chris Ogden takes over. He was a Texas Tech assistant last 2 years, a Tennessee assistant 1 year, and a Texas assistant. So those teams are going to jump out at me. Anytime you return 0 starters, you know, Duke, a lot of people have Duke in their AP top 2 or 3. I even have them lower than that because my rankings are based on how a team is going to start. Duke is going to be in the tournament. Duke is probably going to be a Sweet 16 time. And even if you have 5 quality freshmen, it takes a while to get those teams started and get them playing well, especially defensively at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too. When you have all of this information in front of you, Ralph Michaels joining us, wagertalk.com, you kind of look, and you talked about some power rankings and your power rankings, Ralph, and people are always told maybe they're not familiar with power rankings, but power rankings come across, there's so much information out there. When you look at power rankings, what are some of the things you're looking at, Ralph, and why are some power rankings more reliable than others?
Well, basically, power rankings are how strong a team is, and you want to make your rankings so they correlate to the Vegas line. So if you're making a team, your top team is, let's say, 100 points, and another team is 90, on a neutral court, that would be a 10-point favorite plus your edge. So, you know, power ratings are great to start looking at a play. But for me, I don't even publish my power ratings early in the college basketball season because they're so fluid. I mean, what is a power rating number? Is it how a team is supposed to play today, how it's supposed to play in the first month, how it plays in a few weeks? You know, remember, this college basketball season starts November the 6th. Well, the first quarter or semester ends December the 9th. So we have a lot of kids. You know, we have a lot of kids that aren't even eligible the first quarter, that when they're there in December, yes, they're going to be a vital part of the team, or they were transferred and they transferred in the first quarter and they're not eligible to the next quarter. So those things are always changing. Also, there's a lot of players that may not start the year as a starter, but you expect them to be a starter. So my power ratings are very, very fluid. But what I do is I make my numbers, I compare them to the Vegas line each day, and those numbers that are furthest apart from where the Vegas line is, those are the games I start doing a deeper dive in the day of the game to see if that's going to be a potential play.
And also, and one of the important things that I want to stress that Ralph had mentioned, especially if you're new into sports handicapping and you love college basketball, if you do, make sure you head over to wagertalk.com. But a lot of people, they get sucked up by the big name teams, the big conferences, the North Carolinas of the world, the Villanova. You know, they say these longtime coaches, they're household names, and that's all they focus on. But you mentioned, Ralph, and this is important to go over again, that just because it's a big household name and a blue blood doesn't necessarily mean there's more value on those teams than some of the lesser known conferences.
You know, let's talk about a team that has had great success the last few years, Villanova. Well, if you look back at the NBA draft or players that are in the NBA this season, Duke had 4 players drafted, 3 in the first round. Kentucky had 4 players drafted, 2 in the first round. Villanova had 4 players drafted, 3 of them in the first round, 1 in the second round. Now, Duke and Kentucky have recruiting classes that can overcome that. Despite Villanova's success, they're a smaller school in Philadelphia. They don't have the national name yet to live up to the Kentuckys and the Dukes, and they cannot recruit. So you have a team like Villanova that's been good for so many years. Well, you lose 4 NBA players, you're not going to be the same team. So those are the situations you look for where, yes, the AP voters, I don't mean to call anyone out on an AP voter, but, they're looking at what a team did last year, how many starters are back, what they read about some top 20 teams, and they put in the top 1 through 20. Well, if they are not studying 353 teams, knowing who the players that are injured to start the year out, knowing what the coaching tendencies are, knowing what happened in the scrimmage games, they're just a very Joe Public ranking. So, again, I always look. There are some teams that certainly deserve to be AP top 20 teams, but the ones that aren't, you get a lot of value playing against, and the ones that I feel should be an AP top 20 and are not are really those situations that I love. 2 teams I'll throw out that have big names but haven't had success lately. Marquette. Marquette is one of you look at Marquette and you look at the Big East. Villanova dominated it. 6 of those 10 teams made the tournament last year. Marquette did not. This year, though, Marquette returns 4 starters. They played well down the stretch. I expect that to increase. I think Marquette could surprise a lot of people, be a top 15 team, and perhaps win the Big East. Another blue blood that's been down and out the last few years is Indiana. Well, they're off a 16-15 season. I love good head coaches in the second season. It really is the year to play on those teams. Well, Archie Miller, the ex-Dayton head coach, now the coach at Indiana, after last year, he returns 3 starters, which isn't the most in the Big Ten, but Indiana is a blue blood program. They got a top 10 recruiting class. They have 2 or 3 players that can start immediately, giving them basically 5 or 6 returning starters to that level. So Marquette and Indiana are 2 teams that aren't in the AP top 20. Keep an eye on. I think they will be when we turn the calendar at the beginning of the year.
Ralph Michaels joining us, wagertalk.com. Make sure you get there. Make sure that you download Ralph's guide. Go to the Cal Sports page, the college basketball guide. Ralph does this every year. It's invaluable information. It's at your fingertips. It's listed as a product, but it is free. Make sure you download it and get yourself this and make sure it is handy. And I want to ask you, Ralph, too, about another blue blood, one that I root for. I root for them every year because I love Sean Miller. I think he's one of the best coaches that college has. And every year we ask, can he finally make, the Final Four? And unfortunately, he had a whole bunch of decommittals there when the FBI story broke out and all that good stuff. But if there's any program that can withstand it, it's Arizona. Can Sean Miller actually make the Final Four this year?
Well, that's going to have to be seen. I don't have him in my top 20 now.
Wow. You
talk about the recruits and the amount of recruits that jumped ship from him. Also you are now missing, 2 players that have been historically good in your program. The number 1 player in the draft, DeAndre Ayton. They also lost Alonzo Trier. So again, they're a team that is way behind in the recruiting class. I think it's going to be difficult for them to do that. This year, Oregon to me is the top team in the Pac-12. I think they've made the next step up, but Arizona's one of the teams that has 0 returning starters. And while they have a top 21, they're number 21 in my recruiting rankings, that is not normal Arizona. In fact, USC has the number 18, UCLA has the number 6, and Oregon has the number 3. So they're the only team in the Pac-12 with 0 returning starters, and they have the 4th best recruiting class in the conference. Oof. So again, UCLA and Oregon are the 2 teams that I have 1 and 2 in the Pac-12.
It also seems, Ralph, like it's been forever since a Big Ten team actually took home the national championship and the title. Michigan State comes to mind. Do you have them ranked high up there? Are they a top 5 team heading into this year?
They're not a top 5, but they are just behind in that level. You know, Michigan State's a team that I'm going to compare them to Syracuse. You know, they play different defenses, but you have a couple of the best head coaches, and the problem is you play very, very difficult defenses to learn. So a team like Michigan State, who had 2 players drafted both early in the first round, Jaren Jackson was the number 4 pick, Miles Bridges was the number 12 pick. You lose both your shooting guard, you lose your power forward, and your shooting forward leaves a lot of holes to be filled. And then, again, you watch Michigan State early in the year, their defense can be very mediocre. Then later on in the year, they have a shutdown defense. You know, Purdue only has 1 starter back. To me right now, Michigan is a team that's going to be there. And Wisconsin is another team that we know a few years ago did very well. Last year, Wisconsin only finished 15-18, but you look back at Wisconsin last year, they only had 1 returning starter. Now they have all 5 back for Wisconsin. So I have Wisconsin higher than most people. I have them close. Now, some people do have Michigan State to win. I'm on the outside. Michigan State is the favorite among some experts to win. I just think that the way they start and the way they go slower, that early in the year, I don't have them as one of those top 10 or top 15 teams.
Let's talk about Ralph. Ralph Michaels, by the way, joining us, wagertalk.com. Ralph, here in Miami locally, a lot of excitement regarding Jim Larrañaga, this Miami Hurricanes team. They do have a core group of returnees that were all conference caliber players. I think Bruce Brown and Jaquan Newton are back, and they've also done an awful lot of talking about the recruiting class that Miami got this year. Talk to us about the Miami Hurricanes.
Well, Miami lost 2 players to the NBA, those players you mentioned.
Yes.
Lonnie Walker and Bruce Brown. Those 2 players were drafted in to the NBA this year. You know, Bruce Brown went in the 2nd round, the 42nd pick. Lonnie Walker was first round, 18th pick. Now, if you look at the recruiting ranking and you go to Wager Talk and you download it, you're going to go to the ACC pages and you're going to see that Duke has the number 1 recruiting class in the country. North Carolina has the number 14 class. Notre Dame has the number 15 class. Wake Forest has the number 23 class. I'm going to go all the way down to Louisville has the number 167 class, and Miami has nothing. Miami does not have a grade, so they are not in the top 185 as far as recruiting. Well, should they worry? No, they shouldn't worry, because they got Dane Gack last year. He sat out. He was a redshirt freshman. You had Miles Wilson, who was a transfer from Mount St. Mary's, who didn't play and now is available. Plus, you have 3 new key newcomers this year. You have Zach Johnson, the 6'2", 195-pound guard. He started 35 games for Florida Gulf Coast, averaged 16.1 points per game. And then you also have Anthony Mack from Wyoming. He was a redshirt freshman, sat out last year with the transfer rules. Anthony Mack was a top 50 recruited by some of the top teams in the country. So while you don't have a recruiting grade, it doesn't mean you don't have people to fill the gap with the 2 players that redshirted or sat out with a transfer last year, and the 2 newcomers who are both eligible immediately. You also have got Cameron McGusty, who is a transfer from Oklahoma, started 8 games for that team. He does have to sit out this year, so he's not going to be part of the newcomers. But you have 4 new players that are quality new players. And again, Florida Gulf Coast, it's not the ACC, but they are a quality program. And to be a 35-game starter and average 16 points for that, I think the Miami fans are going to be very happy to what Zach Johnson brings to the table.
Yeah, and also a pretty damn good coach there. Ralph Michaels joining us. How about in your neck of the woods? Nobody's talking about him, but Nevada was a Sweet 16 team a year ago, and they're returning a few people that were pretty good last year.
I was going to bring them up because they are a team of irony. It could have been very possible that they would have been a bottom 2 or 3 team in the conference. Well, what's the difference? Well, you had 3 players. You had the Martin brothers. That's their point guard, Cody, and their shooting guard, Khalib, and their shooting forward, Jordan Caroline. All 3 of those decided to not go to the NBA and come back. So when you finished the season last year, you might have lost your entire core and had 0 returning starters. Those 3 collectively agreed together to come back. And then what happens? You had Jordan Brown, who was the top 15 player in the entire country. He played in California. He believes what Nevada can do with Eric Musselman as the coach. He knew these key players were coming back. He wanted to be part of the program. And then you get Trey Porter. The problem with Nevada last year is they didn't have the size to compete with the big boys. Trey Porter is an Old Dominion transfer. He started every game at Old Dominion. He's a 6'11" center. He adds that extra piece to the puzzle. So if those 3 don't come back, Nevada is probably 150 or 200 out of 353 teams. They come back, they get the 2 additions, and now all of a sudden they're a top 10 team. I believe in them. I have them rated about 11 or 12. I think they're going to play very well, but I think if you put them against big talent early, they're not quite as good as those people, but they made the Sweet 16 run last year, and I clearly expect them to do it again. They very well could challenge Gonzaga for the #1 seed in the West, and that's a sad thing to say when I'm talking about Nevada and Gonzaga being the top seeds in the West and not mentioning a Pac-12 team.
That's so true there. Ralph Michaels joining us. College basketball season just around the corner. You still got time. Head over to wagertalk.com. Look at the Cal Sports page. Make sure you download the very educational, very informative, and you are going to need this. That's Ralph's College Basketball Guide. You're going to love it. Chock full of some amazing information that you are certainly going to need. And Ralph, I can't believe we've been talking 20 minutes and we haven't brought up John Calipari or Kentucky yet. I'm just going to go and say, I'm going to go on a limb and say they're probably loaded again.
They're loaded again. Yes. And it's pretty simple. You know they're going to be loaded again. And, the thing about this, it's one of those situations where the rich gets richer. I talked about the teams that had 4 players drafted in the NBA. Kevin Knox was a first-round pick, number 9. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, number 11. Then you had Vanderbilt and Delio. Delio wasn't even a starter on the team, and yet he got drafted in the second round, number 45. So when you have 4 players drafted, you think that it's going to be very difficult for you to come from behind and be that good of a team again. Well, like I said, Duke and Kentucky are 2 people that can do it. They return 2 starters. They return a wealth of talent. And the scary thing is, John Calipari usually is one to say, oh, my team's going to struggle early and we have trouble and we're not going to play well. Well, I'll tell you what, he put the SEC Nation on alert when he said, I am very, very excited about this team and who they are. So you look at a team like that, again, you lost 4 players, you return 2, you have plenty of talent, and then what do they get? Oh, yeah, they get Reed Travis, one of the best players in the Pac-12. He's a Stanford transfer. And he's just one of 3 players in Stanford history to have at least 1,400 points and 7 rebounds. So, again, you think you're going to lose people, and then you have the rich get richer scenario where this guy potentially could play in the NBA, and he comes and transfers to Kentucky, and since he's a graduate transfer, he's eligible immediately. So, again, that's what makes Kentucky one of the top teams in the country year in and year out, and certainly this year. They're one of the odds-on favorite to win it.
Maybe you said the rich keep getting richer. Maybe the richest of them all. Here we go again, Duke. We might as well say it. If they're not number 1 on your list, Ralph, they're probably somewhere close. Not a great defensive team last year, but maybe the recruits this year will change that. What do you think of Duke?
Well, again, you have 0 returning starters for this team. Players that were drafted: Marvin Bagley, the number 2 pick in the draft. Wendell Carter, the number 7 pick in the draft. Grayson Allen, the number 21 pick in the draft. Gary Trent Jr., the number 37 pick in the draft. No returning starters, and yet you're still in the AP top 5. Well, I'll tell you what, probably the most exciting player since maybe ever as a guard coming in is Zion Williamson. You've probably seen his YouTube dunks last year, and he's a body. He's 6'7", 285, but he's a power forward. But think of LeBron. I mean, he has that type of talent where it was men against boys when he played. And the 275, he's very quick. He can dribble. He's agile. He played at Spartanburg Day School in South Carolina, and this was a school that plays all the top teams in the country. So he played against the best. He's AAU hardened. So, you're looking at one of the best players. The funny thing is that right now he may be the most popular freshman in the country, but they also have R.J. Barrett, who right now, if you asked NBA experts, he would be the number 1 pick in the draft next year.
Wow.
He played in Canada, came down and played Monteverde, Florida. So you have a 6'7" shooting guard who just shoots the lights out and is just incredible. So again, not only do you have the number 1 recruiting class, you have the players who very well could be number 1 and 2 in the NBA draft next year. That puts your season at a different level. How they gel in defense is a different thing. In my ratings, I have them number 8 because my ratings I'm doing for right now.
Right.
If I had to rate them and project what they're going to be, well, they're going to be a top 2 or 3 team if all these guys play healthy. But when you have 5 new starters, even if they're that good, there's times that there's been a flop. But I think that, people have talked about the Fab Five at Michigan with that Chris Webber era a long time ago for a lot of years. I think this team's going to blow that team out of the water.
Speaking of defense, got to ask you about Tony Bennett and Virginia. Probably one of the most boring systems in the world to watch, unless you like 50 to 48 games. They're fantastic, but he's pretty loaded again, Virginia, and who would have thunk it, but they're pretty loaded again going into this season, aren't they?
My number 1 team.
Wow.
That is who I am.
Wow.
That is who I have at number 1. And it's because of that. It's because Bennett's defensive system is now in place. He's there the 10th year, but we have a lot of turnover from that class. Last year, they allowed 54 points per game. They were plus 13.1 points per game. Of course, they were number 1 AP during the regular season. They finished the regular season number 1, and I think that loss to Maryland, Baltimore County, the first ever 16 seed to beat a 1. I think that gives them a lot of motivation to just come out of the gate and pummel some teams. They were embarrassed by that loss. It was an embarrassment for the program. With the talent they have back, the recruiting class wasn't great. I mean, it's tough to get in Virginia, and if you're a athlete that's getting good grades and your choice is Duke or Virginia, well, you're going to pick Duke, and secondly, you might pick North Carolina after that. But Virginia has the number 63 recruiting class. But to me, I still have them, and like I said, my number 1 team to start. because the defense is going to start the season like it ended, which is a rarity in college basketball. I look for them to be a very good ATS team to start the year.
And I got to ask you this too, because I've heard some statements about this kid, and because he's stuck at Marshall, not a lot of people talk about him, but there are those that learned a whole lot about him in last year's tournament. But John Elmore, is this a guy that could actually lead the nation in scoring this year?
Yeah, he's number 2. Blue Ribbon is a product that I completely respect. My guide is to get you started. If you're going to read up on information, then you certainly want to read Blue Ribbon. They have him as a second-team All-American. I have a customer of mine who has been a long-time Cal Sports customer. Actually went to the same high school as he went to and watched him play at high school. And he's from that area. He wanted to go to Marshall instead of West Virginia. He's the best player in the state. When you look at West Virginia and Bob Huggins' team, you say, wow, West Virginia's pretty talented. Well, the best kid in the state is playing at Marshall. As far as leading the conference, it's going to depend how the season plays out. He averaged 22.7, but I just love his overall game. I mean, he averaged 23 points per game, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, and almost 2 steals a game. He led the league in scoring and assists. He's a 2-time All-CUSA first-team player. He declared for the draft last year, didn't have an agent, so when they said he's going to be a late first round or early second, he decided to come back, put another year of his experience on tape. So again, that's just another motivation for a player. When you're close to being good enough to go to the NBA, and then you have that year, it's like we talk about in baseball when players are on their free agent year or their last year of their contract. All of a sudden, how many come up with one of their best seasons of their career? So Elmore's in that spot. Elmore's in that spot this year.
And let me ask you, because we'd be remiss if we didn't mention it, but Sister Jean, remarkable last year. Loyola, unbelievable. But can we expect another repeat of what we saw last year with Loyola and Sister Jean? Do they have enough? Are they bringing enough back to be able to make another run?
I don't think so.
No.
They were a quality team. You won the Missouri Valley Conference, 15-3 record, 32-6 overall. You were +8 per game. Now, the only reason I don't think so is because the team that finished second last year was Southern Illinois, and Southern Illinois with Barry Hinson his 7th year, they return all 5 starters from that team, and they've got a couple transfers coming in. So while Loyola is going to be a very good team, the 2 teams that finish behind them and 3 of the next 4 teams return either 4 or 5 starters, and now you go from being an unknown in that team. The Missouri Valley used to be Wichita State. Well, Wichita State obviously transferred out last year. Loyola transfers in from the Horizon, where they played against Cleveland State for a while. But now you have the bullseye on your back, and every time you make those road trips, they're going to make it a lot tougher for you, where you didn't have that scenario to start the year last season.
Are you looking forward to the Maui Invitational? Is it back to being the early season king of tournaments here? It looks loaded, right? I mean, what are we talking? Duke, Gonzaga, Auburn, Arizona, Xavier, Illinois, San Diego State, Iowa State. That's a pretty loaded early season tournament.
It is, and the thing is, you just have to watch those games. They're on weird times, but you get value. It's an opportunity for you to watch those games. I mean, you want to talk about yes, that is the most loaded tournament. Obviously, it's the beginning of the year. You have less travel restrictions, and you're getting some big-name players. But listen to this card for Tuesday. This is opening day. Again, there's 143 games. I'm going to guess about 90 of them are going to be lined on Tuesday. Number 2, Kentucky against number 4, Duke. Number 1, Kansas against number 10, Michigan State. Number 17, Florida State against Florida. I have Florida in my top 15 in the AP rating. They're number 29. And then Nevada, we're going to watch them. They're AP number 7 against BYU. So when you have an opening night of college basketball with that many good games, it's going to be exciting.
Yes, it certainly is. College basketball is here. It's going to be amazing. And the question is, have you gone to wagertalk.com and downloaded Ralph Michaels' college basketball? I don't even want to call it a cheat sheet, but it's certainly a sheet that you've got to have in front of you. It is loaded with information. And all you do, once again, if you're just joining us, head over to wagertalk.com, go to the Cal Sports page. It's listed as a product. It's very simple. It's everything that you need to do in order to get yourself started about this college basketball season. It's free. Download it, get it, and like Ralph said, it's starting on Tuesday. Keep an eye on some of these games because it's a great starting point, Ralph. Your sheet is a great starting point, but from there, you can really start to hone in on some of these teams with these early season conference games and what we're going to see moving forward here.
Hey, Joe, we didn't talk about this off the air, so I don't know the answer, but if you're available Tuesday, I'm happy to go over a couple of my top games and the reasoning and how I handicap those games just to give our listeners a start to the season and what they can expect if they ever become a Cal Sports customer.
Listen, mi casa, su casa, Ralph. I don't want to absolutely, the people would absolutely love to be able to hear what you got to say. I mean, it's exciting. Yes, we got the NFL, we got college football, but let's be realistic. We're about to dive into some college basketball over the next couple of months, and there is something about March Madness, Ralph, that just kind of it kind of runs through the veins, doesn't it?
Yeah, you know, it's so many people are betting it. So many games are going on at once. So many people embrace the underdogs. You know, any other year, Nevada would have been a Sweet 16 darling, but because of Loyola, that didn't come to fruition. But, you know, the cream still rises at the end. We've seen that. You know, none of those games that teams that have been close have gotten to that elite level, and that just shows. I mean, going through that stretch of having to play those 6 games, you can get a couple wins, but winning all 6, you really do have to be an elite team that has it on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball.
Who's your sleeper, Ralph? Give us a sleeper team, somebody to keep an eye on, man. Somebody you got in that back pocket that you go, you know what, they can do some damage.
Well, I bet Marquette to win it all at 150 to 1. And, you know, like I said, is it going to happen? Probably not. But, you know, if you have those situations, you can always hedge later. And the thing about college basketball is, if you take up a long shots and they make the tournament, you can hedge out of it and get your money back at that point by betting against that team if they lose when you're in those roles. So, you know, Indiana and Marquette, I mentioned them at the beginning. I like picking a team that's not in the top 20. That way, you know, it's really going to make a statement if they stick out. You know, do I think they're going to win? No. If you said, hey, I'm going to let you bet one team to win it all this year, would I pick them? No. I wouldn't also pick my number 1 team, Virginia, because when you're playing that type of defense that many days in a row, coaches find flaws, and the other coaches that are very good that play you the next week can learn to expose those. Yep. So while Virginia is not my pick to win the entire tournament, again, they're my number 1 team right now going into November to cash some tickets for me with my highest power rating number. So again, college basketball is so fluid. There's coaches that like to win early. There's some coaches that use the preseason games as a trial waiting for conference play. So there's so much that goes into it where the power rating to me is less important in college basketball than other sports because of that situation, because how long the season is, because how many games you play.
Which is why it is so valuable to have Ralph Michaels at your fingertips at wagertalk.com, because let's face it, you're not going to have all the time in the world to spend like Ralph does being able to handicap these games and these teams and have eyeballs. That's why we've got Ralph. So he can point you in the right direction, and he's available to you 24/7 simply by heading over to wagertalk.com. But a good place to start is the Cal Sports page. Download the free product. It's his college basketball. I don't even want to say a one sheet, but it's his college basketball download that you need to have in order to be able to get yourself started on the right track. And he'll join us on Tuesday. We'll kind of break down some of those games that are kicking off the season. We're excited. I know Ralph is excited, and all the information you could possibly need simply by heading heading to wagertalk.com. Ralph, this was awesome. It's like a college basketball meat sandwich here. This was great. We'll do it again on Tuesday. And just tell people, get to wagertalk.com, right, and download the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's just your start guide. There's so much, and when people say, well, you know, how do you handicap 140 games on Tuesday? I don't know. It's never happened before. You know, usually we start off the season in college basketball with 8 or 10 games, and, you know, there's only 70 games the entire first week. I won't have enough time this week. So, you know, and it's my business and it's what I do, but I'll do it to the best of my ability, and I feel we're going to find a few nuggets of value in that Tuesday card.
So, guys, really the bottom line here is that you got to take advantage of the wealth of information that Ralph Michaels has when it comes to college basketball. Get to wagertalk.com right now. Go to the Cal Sports page. Look at the product. You'll see it. It's the College Basketball Guide. It's a free download. Download it. It's a great place for you to start. And then don't forget, come and join us on Tuesday. Ralph will join us. Huge opening slate of games. Ralph's going to be here to try and help you navigate and figure out exactly where the value is. All sorts of great information. But it starts by going to wagertalk.com right now. Go to Cal Sports page and get yourself that College Basketball Guide. Is that about it, Ralph? I mean, did I miss anything on that?
No, not at all. You know what? People talk about the most exciting time of the year. Well, when you have all these sports to pick from and all the value abound, it really is the most exciting time. Can't wait till Tuesday tips off.
Yeah, it's going to be so much fun. Make sure you join us here. Ralph will join us, but head over to wagertalk.com and get that knowledge. Download that College Basketball Guide. He is Ralph Michaels. I'm Joe Raineri. Guys, thank you so very much. Good luck in the games, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday. Thank you, Ralph.
Thanks, Joe. Always a pleasure.